course, to our collaborative team, without which we wouldn't have been able to pull this together. And what a journey it has been. So many amazing speakers, so many amazing conversations, and so many topics. And one thing that's been quite clear to us is the desire and need for more series of these nature. And I'm just forever grateful for this time together to again move the needle on creating collaboration and Indigenous space in this work of land planning, of conservation, of stewardship through active partnerships and active relationship building reciprocity with one another, redistribution, and respect with one another. And I want to say this has been our own journey as a collaborative team. Hannah Marie and Liana and Cheese Cook, myself, always working on our reciprocity with one another and taking care of one another as we move forward in this work in Indigenous and tribal stewardship. And I greatly also want to thank the USDA. The Alaska Native Hawaiian Serving Program is what funds our work here in tribal stewardship and governance in food and energy security. And so it's really wonderful to see Kristi with us today. And I know many of us are getting back to our desks after a beautiful celebration of love in Southeast, and Wathlagirak and Brian. And it's always good to celebrate the love and the goodness that we share, the harvest. And so I just wanted to say Anabasi to all of you in this work that show up to move that needle. So Basi, Cheese Cook, Liana, and Hannah Marie.
Liana, Anabasi, Carrie, very well said. Yeah, it's been a really good couple of weeks, and we've been putting the last couple sessions together for you to really get into practical strategies and successful models for Indigenous-led land planning. So today's session really is going to highlight a couple of successful models. And then, like usual, we're going to get into discussion afterwards and pose a question to you, and I really challenge you to stay on and get involved in those discussions, because that's where we're really learning from each other, the tribal representatives on and the government representatives, state and federal, and the nonprofits. So we're learning from each other constantly and gaining important knowledge so that we can stand shoulder to shoulder walking forward into the future. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce you to the first set of speakers, and I'll ask them to turn their cameras on. Kristi has her camera on. She is the tribal liaison at the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. And Kristi has worked for the Forest Service, for NRCS. She also has an anthropology degree and natural resource management degree from Fort Lewis College. And then Robert Stephan Sr., and hopefully he's on, I can turn his camera on. He is the land and resource manager for Tyonek Native Corporation and also the board president for Tyonek Tribal Conservation District. There he is. Hey, Robert. And then Laurie Stuart. And Laurie is the executive director of the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District. Dr. Stuart earned her doctorate of education from the University of Missouri with an emphasis on sustainability, social justice, and participatory methods in natural resource management. So from these speakers, we're going to learn about the Tribal Conservation District 7th-generation planning and how that was so fruitful by visioning into the future and honoring the ancestral values. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right, thank you, Crystal. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. Good to see you, Leanna. And congrats on your new one. Yeah, good to see everybody back. Those who made that wonderful journey out to Prince of Wales Island, making it back to our offices, although I didn't want to leave, but myself. So thanks. I will do a little bit more of an introduction to myself here through the presentation, and then I'm going to hand it off to Laurie and Robert to give their perspective on things. And I'm just going to cover the agency perspective, pretty much the high cut point. So give me a second. All right, are we good to go? All right. So just a little bit more about myself, Kristi Harper.
Kristi, do you
Yeah.
want to put it on presentation mode? We can
I
see
thought it
like
would.
we can.
Oh, I'm sharing the wrong screen. Hold up. Good call. Want to do that.
There we go. Perfect.
Is that better?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to do a little bit more introduction of myself. Kristi Harper. As Crystal mentioned, I am the Alaska Native Liaison for USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. But I was born in Juneau, raised primarily in Anchorage. I'm a Tlingit and Lakota, and I have worked with the Forest Service. Also started my career with Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Alaska. My degree from Fort Lewis College was in Natural Resources Management and Anthropology. So I have a pretty, I guess, diverse education. When I was with the Forest Service, I not only was able to, watch grass grow and then watch the cows consume it. That represents the picture there in the lower left, as well as Bear Butte there in the background. But I was also able to be an archaeologist and a district archaeologist with the Forest Service on the sacred Black Hills, the Pahasapa for the Lakota. So that was also a very rewarding experience. Not only was I able to record prehistoric sites, but I was also able to work with some of the more historic sites with cabins and the structures that were related to mining, as in the upper right-hand corner. And the middle picture there with those little funny looking hooks with eyeballs on them, it represents pretty much where my safe space is for myself during the summers. I truly love fishing. I guess love is probably not the right word. It's more like obsessed. So here shortly, any spare moment I have, you will find me in some type of water. I don't care where it is. I'm usually standing in it, trying to catch some fish. So the rise of tribal conservation districts in Alaska. So first off, what is a tribal conservation district? A tribal conservation district is a geographical area established for conservation purposes with a board of directors. And this board of directors prioritizes the priorities for the tribal conservation district. And essentially, they take those priorities, these tribal priorities, and then they tell USDA what they are looking for. They are the ones coming to the table and bringing USDA to the table and saying, hey, we want to fix 1, 2, and 3. Or maybe they want to enhance, fish population, moose population. It's essentially the tribal conservation district coming to USDA and telling USDA their priorities. So tribal conservation districts in 2011, and that's the year I actually came back to Alaska from South Dakota. Brought my whole family up here. My husband hadn't seen Alaska ever. And so he came up here sight unseen, and he thought he was going to have this grand cabin with a big, huge meadow in front with the river running through it, and not so much, but that's okay. He's still here, and this is the map of the tribal conservation districts in 2011, and we have Tyonek, Asakarsmute, Mountain Village, and Queeflup. And the other shaded ones were in the works, and some of these other ones are what we call state soil and water districts. In 2014, we kind of had an explosion of TCDs, is what we call them, and we jumped from 3 to almost 14. And then in 2018, we had another slight explosion, and we were sitting at about 16 tribal conservation districts throughout the state of Alaska. And I need to update this map. We currently have here in 2022, we have 21 tribal conservation districts that involve at least 38 federally recognized tribes, about a dozen village corporations, and 1 regional corporation. So why a TCD? A TCD takes these 3 entities, one of them being the Secretary of Agriculture, the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, federally recognized tribes, and if the federally recognized tribes wants to involve their respective ANCSA corporations, they can. And if they do, they're also a signatory to this mutual agreement, and either all the tribe and the Secretary of Ag can form the TCD, or the tribe, native corporations, and the Secretary of Ag can form a TCD. So why a TCD? I'll back up a little. Why a TCD? And it's kind of what I mentioned at the beginning. When I first came up here, I was tasked with forming TCDs, and I was told 2 things. 1, a TCD does not have any regulatory authority. And 2, if they form one, if the tribe forms one, there's no money associated with it right out of pocket. So I had to sit back and really think and really wonder, why would I go out and try to form these tribal conservation districts? But what I came to realize is the tribal conservation district is probably the best model of Indigenous-led land use planning. Why? Because it's the tribe telling the USDA what their priorities are. It is not the federal government coming in and saying, hey, we have these programs, you need to make your plan fit our programs. It is totally not that. And I think that is why, the singular reason why the tribal conservation district kind of exploded up here in Alaska. But as NRCS, we form the tribal conservation districts. I do want to point out that it does help with access to some of our programs, but it's not required to form a TCD to apply for our programs. Now I'll kind of go, I won't go into Tyonek too much. I just wanted to mention here in my presentation that they are the first tribal conservation district in Alaska. And I'll let Robert and Laurie handle that, but I just wanted to share this slide and a couple programs that Tyonek Tribal Conservation District is able to successfully be awarded and completed some awesome projects. This culvert one is with our Regional Conservation Partnership Program through NRCS. And I won't do any details, I'll let them do it. Again, another one, the high tunnels pictured here is with USDA NRCS EQIP funding. And just wanted to share some pictures of Tyonek. The lower left is when they first signed their mutual agreement. And then the middle picture, fast forward, I think about 10 years, and this is about 2015, when the Secretary of Agriculture, Bill Sack, came to visit. he made a point to meet with them. Another good example of a tribal conservation district is the Atna Intertribal Resource Commission. Their mission statement is, with self-determination, we will conserve, develop, and use our resources for the maximum benefit of our people. And their core purpose is traditional resource stewardship. And they too have,
Hey,
and they too have been able to successfully work with NRCS programs, one of them being the Conservation Innovation Grant. And they were looking at ways to enhance some of their moose habitat. And the picture there on the left is in the wintertime, and they're trying to cut down and mow down some spruce trees just to kind of promote the growth of some moose browse. So through this, AITRC was able to also secure funding, not only with NRCS, but other agencies as well, and other departments within the federal government. And through all that, they were able to, move into their own building. So they have their own office, and that was in February of 2018. With that too, they were able to hire staff, anthropologists, biologists, project managers, and some administrative staff. And again, all of this is with the tribe and the TCD coming together and making these priorities by talking to their stakeholders and tribal people within their respective boundaries. This is all them. This is driven by them. USDA, the federal government, has no other than be able to provide funding opportunities. We're really hands off. Originally, I just wanted to take they were called Critter. They decided to change their name to AITRC about 5 years ago. I don't know why, but I think it does capture a larger picture of the Atna people rather than limiting it to Copper River. So the picture there on the left was pretty right about when I got here in 2011. They were still working with the kindness of Atna Incorporated, loaning them some office space and staff time to host their meetings. And fast forward to 2018, this was their first meal in their new building. And they were slowly becoming self-sustainable. And I showed up in February, it was, I believe, 45 below zero. Not knowing what I was getting into as far as, I thought I was just supposed to show up for a meeting. I actually showed up to put together chairs. So I was putting together furniture that day. I also wanted to highlight too, while Atna and Tyonek are doing these awesome things, there's other TCDs throughout the state that are also doing some good things that might be viewed as maybe smaller projects. And I think that's also what is also key to a tribal conservation district. It's really up to the tribe to decide how big they want to make themselves or how close to knit to the community they want to be. It's really up to them. And I think that's a great opportunity for them to focus on their own issues, their own natural resource concerns. So in this case, Mountain Village TCD, they were able to secure a small pot of funds from ANTHC to do a little community garden for the school. And they also, a while ago, had NRCS help them develop a trail map of sorts with Indigenous names. And it's just a local trail map of hunting routes, and I do believe we had some berry picking locations on there, but that stayed with the tribe. We weren't able to share that one out. Another TCD, Tidrin-Jik, their mission to protect and preserve the natural resources of the land and waters through traditional values for healthy current and future generations. The late Lance Whitwell there in the left hand was giving a presentation at, I believe, the Alaska Forum on the Environment. And he really, I remember when I first met Mr. Whitwell, he was pretty, I don't want to say stubborn, but he was pretty direct and really cautious about forming a TCD. And then I think he popped up at some conference about 9 months later and he said, okay, I want to do this. And here he was like 2 years later, just trying to also encourage other tribes to form a TCD, just because he felt, he was worried, one, that the government would come in and try to tell the tribe what their priorities should be and how they should develop their planning and how they should do this. And he flat out said, nope. He said, this is us. This is us telling the government what we want and what we need. He said, this is why we need more of these in Alaska. Prince of Wales TCD, my favorite quote from Mr. Dennis Nickerson there is, we don't cultivate the land cultivates us. And he too also formed the TCD, and he encouraged 4 tribes on the island to join. He also was able to secure the respective 4 village corporations, and he is currently working on Sea Alaska to join. But he has done a number of different things on the island and has gotten involved with a number of different groups on the island as well as securing funding through actually Alaska Conservation Foundation to work with Indigenous Sentinels Network. And that was just pretty recent. And here's just some of the things that as we've worked with some of the TCDs, we're able to, as an agency, as just us, NRCS, work with Vinitai through EQIP. We were also able to help a lot of these tribal conservation districts get some larger pot of funding through our Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And here are just some happy pictures of what a TCD can represent. I included the one with the secretary signing the MOU. Actually, he came up here to Alaska, so this was a pretty unique and neat opportunity for Tyonek. The lower left there is some of NRCS staff traveling out to Nunivak Island to meet with them and see what their priorities are several years ago. And through the years, headquarters NRCS national office has taken note of a lot of the tribal conservation districts up here in Alaska and all the great projects they're doing. In fact, the chief of NRCS back then was able to highlight some of those projects at a national conference. And with that, I think, one more picture. Occasionally we get some dignitaries up here, and a lot of our tribal conservation districts seize this opportunity to carry their message and carry their priorities to people in national headquarters. In this particular picture, we had the acting chief of NRCS out in the Otna country, being able to show, they're just demonstrating the importance of our subsistence lifestyle. So we could save questions till the end, but there's my contact info if you need it. And with that, I will transfer it over to Laurie and Robert to go into a tribal perspective on their TCD. Oops, stop. There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Beautiful day in Alaska today, especially in Tyonek. Getting ready to start our fishing pretty soon. Laurie, if you have the presentation, if you could probably pull that up, that'd be great.
Sure. It looks like the host needs to give me permission to share.
I just wanted to mention one thing too about that last picture that Kristi had. In the background, you can see a picture of Bob Jones. I just wanted to recognize Bob, as he was there since the beginning, and he took the blunt of new ideas that came from the Tribal Conservation District. So he was right there hand in hand, and we probably wouldn't be where we are today or made so much progress as when he was with us. So just wanted to make sure that he was mentioned. Thank you.
Hi, Laurie. We're having Zoom tech difficulties, but I have your presentation, so I'm going to pull it up and share screen for everyone.
Perfect. Can I also just make sure that you can hear me? Because if not, I'll solve that problem while Robert's talking.
We can hear you, so you're good there.
It's slightly glitchy, but we can hear you coming through.
And hopefully, right about now, we should be able to see your presentation.
Okay, there we go. There's the contact information for Tyonek Tribal Conservation District. As mentioned before, Robert Stephan from Tyonek. Dr. Laurie Stuart is our current executive director. And one thing I'd also like to mention, somebody that moved on to the Department of Fish and Game, our ex-executive director, Crystal, is also online. So if she'd like to jump in at any time, that'd be great. She was working with us for many years and she was there from the start also. So if there's anything that important you think that we're forgetting, so feel free to jump in. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, just the creation of the Conservation District. We've been active, I guess, a little bit before 2005, but being formally formed back in 2005 with the Native Village of Tyonek Native Corporation, United States Department of Agriculture, and RCS. That's basically our makeup now since inception. There's two, we can get that down to probably next slide. It shows our formation later, so next slide, please. We originated with a group with Tyonek Native Corporation, Native Village of Tyonek, organizational meetings to decide what the goals and some of the projects and what the community needed at the time. There was priorities set up that involved everything from subsistence, economic opportunity, resource development, cultural preservation, and basically to help out our lands and use the opportunity to work with the USDA and RCS for some of the programs that they had on the books at the time. One thing to mention too is that some of these programs we were not considered as original farmers and ranchers within the Farm Bill. So through some lobbying efforts, we actually was able to put Alaska Native corporations on in the Farm Bill. So I think that's one of the best things that Tyonek Tribal Conservation District has added to the conservation districts in Alaska. So next, please. We started with Dick Gooby with the 7 Generations process visioning through a little conference that we had in the village. Looking and talking with Dick Gooby about the things that we wanted to accomplish in the conservation district was we found out that the visioning process was great, but a lot of the process through the 7 generations was absolutely, or it was kind of built for the reservations in the lower 48. So that's the reason why we came up with the 16-week partnership. And we thought we were ready to go and we were going to take care of the world, take care of the Cookoonin area. When we first had our first meeting with the 16-week partnership, we invited everybody that we could find who wanted to be a part of it. We held a meeting in Anchorage and we actually had 300 participants. So just to think, we were astounded about the interest, and we're thinking, how are we going to do this with so many partners? So with this, we ended up creating the group with out of this Native Village of Tyonek Native Corporation and at-large person. I'm just going to go to the next slide, please. The boundaries for the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District. It used to be 16A, but there are 16A and B because there wasn't a formal tribal government beyond 16A, which is the boundary for Beluga area. So we decided to ask Squindon, Alexander Creek, if we can encompass them in our game unit managed area so we can all share what resources and projects, priorities that we need to have on the west side of the Cook Inlet. So that's how we came up with game unit 16B. Next, please. The board composition, as I was saying, there's 2 from Native Village of Tyonek, 2 appointed by the Tyonek Native Corporation Board of Directors. When we first started, there was only 1 at-large person. The reason why we had our at-large person or persons is because we looked throughout our district and found out what kind of resource people do we have in the area that we can partner with. The first person that we partnered with was actually from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. He was in charge of the Tyonek area with the subsistence part of the Fish and Game. So the reason why we had that was one of our priorities or goals was to help manage or help boost the population of moose, and also to help out with the dwindling of the fish population. So that was our major goals and priorities that we set. So the at-large person was the first person that we had, was a great fit, especially with the resources that they had with maps and all of the scientific information that we had. Currently we have 3 at-large members on our board, and these are handpicked by the board and offering to the partners that we have. Our second at-large person is actually one of the business people around the area that wants to do some economic development, and he's actually one of the managers for Donlin Gold. The reason why we brought him to the table was some of the scientific information that they have, some of the mapping that they have throughout the area, and signing NDAs and to what we can to help us be better acquainted with the rest of the unit area and to bring scientific information and what have you to help us throughout the conservation district. The third person that we have now is the Siri land manager that encompasses that we have a 3-4 now because of the information and governing bodies that we have, the Native Village of Tyonek, Tyonek Native Corporation, and the regional corporation. So with that, we can all work together. Some of the questions that we had before when we, with our board composition, was how do you know when to work, how do you work with each other and your boundaries? The first thing that we have, or through our discussions with each other, is that we all leave our politics at the door. And that has helped us all tremendously. We work on everything that we can collaboratively that we know we can work on together. And anything beyond that is done by take it back to your council or your board of directors. Okay, next one, please. Just to let you know, yeah, a while back they were asking us about what our motto would be. And it just came up, subsistence or agriculture. So that's basically how we got together. And I think Laurie will come up next to tell you a little bit about some of the plans and everything that we're doing now. So I appreciate this time and thank you very much. Laurie?
Sure, thank you, Robert. So the next slide, I was just going to run through talking about tangible impacts on some of the partners and funders that we work with. TTCD has been structured around 4 strategic program areas. Next slide. The largest of ours financially and geographically would be our habitat monitoring and restoration. And I also feel like kind of doing a shout out not only to Kristi Sankata for the work that she's done here, but this room has a number of our partners, and it was really fun to come in today and see all the friendly faces in the participant list. So some of you are aware and are partners in the work that we do. But for Tyonek, one of the greatest needs that was identified was to maintain and booster the subsistence species, specifically salmon, and there have been some moose projects as well. But a lot of what we do right now is really around restoring the salmon habitat and diminishing threats to the salmon and to the habitat. So for example, one of our keystone projects is working on fish passage and culverts. And then we follow that or support that also with the suppression of northern pike and marine and terrestrial invasive species too, and do monitoring so that we can contribute data to the anadromous waters catalog and do overall monitoring of the health of the watershed. And then of course, one of the roles that we fill by being sort of a middle bridge between the village and the community and their needs and the agencies that we work with are to really coordinate with agencies and with the different funding funders and funding buckets that are available for each of these projects. So, and we're happy to share these slides. So because I put on here, for each of these programs, again, who some of our partners and funders are. So we work with the Tyonek Native Corporation. We work very closely with the Native Village of Tyonek. And in fact, they have a grant through the BIA to do some of the invasive species work. And so we not only work with them on it, but we help them to manage that grant. We work with Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, and RCS. We also have been doing some work with NIFWIF and have been asked to apply to the Coastal Resilience Fund, hopefully that will help us to redo our watershed plan here in the near future. And then other landowners might be corporations such as SERI. We work with Fish and Game to do the pike work and other fish monitoring work, and then working with the Matsu Basin Sustainable Fish, I think that meant to be an F, Fish Partnership, as well as the Kenai Peninsula Borough one as well. Our district really crosses across two governmental units from a borough perspective, and then the CRWP program out of Valdez. Next slide. I was really excited to show you talking about tangible impacts. And again, she doesn't want to be called out, but I've been in this role now for a year. Kristi Sankata really stepped on board as the first staff member, and then the first executive director for TTCD. And I really feel like I'm showing off her work. But this image here shows the status that was recorded when TTCD first looked at some of the salmon habitat around Tyonek. And so these orange or yellow lines are showing areas that were considered to be compromised habitat for salmon. And then next slide. We just created this new graphic, which shows all of these green lines, all this habitat that we've opened up. That is 45 miles of stream, 587 lake acres have been restored. And then of course we continue to monitor what's happening there, continue to monitor the culverts, make sure that debris is removed, that things are working as they should be. It's just this continual monitoring and restoration piece. Next slide, please. And this project in particular really is the best example of the way that we serve in the middle. So the needs are driven by the tribe through both the village and the corporation. And then TTCD comes in to help bring in the technical assistance, which might be some that we have here. So we also have biologists and outreach specialists, facilitators, working with Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, et cetera. And then matching that as well with financial assistance that might come from Fish and Wildlife Service programs or NRCS programs such as EQIP. NOAA might have allocations that they could assist with. And then of course you see then some donors that might be local landowners or local folks that have also some are local stakeholders in this work. And then we manage those projects with the key partners to get it implemented. And so as a tribal conservation district, it might fall on us to get to receive those funds and then put out the RFPs to get the contractors to come in and do the work, to get the inspectors to inspect it, and then to get the agencies to sign off on it. So we really keep the wheel going, so to speak. Next slide, please. The second of our programs is also a Keystone program, and one of our favorites to talk about from a really human standpoint is the Tyonek Grown program. So our goals here are really around food security and wellness. I really love the idea that the land cultivates us. Being out in the land and growing things is a really great opportunity for mental wellness as well as physical wellness and food security. It brings economic opportunities. So one thing that we are really looking at currently is how sustainable this is as a market project, that really the village is probably growing food for itself rather than trying to grow food for the people who can purchase it. So we're looking at some new models there. But we have an amazing intern program. So we should have 6 of the students working with us this summer. Other staff who come on, and these are sort of their entry-level jobs. They're learning not only agriculture, but also some business skills as well that can be applied into future work that they do. So we have about 1.5 acres out there as a community garden. It's not in the photo, but there's a very large solar panel grid out there for irrigation and ventilation. We have a small hydroponic system in the school that currently is really more about education than growing agriculture, but it's a huge growth area for us. We would really like to see that hydroponic system growing. Hopefully, not only in the school, but there's some talk about building a cultural center or expanding. So that in a very intersectional way, hydroponics might serve for education, for food security, for economy, all kinds of things that could be done there. Something for elders to do, for example, our youth internship program. And then we are also looking at mixing some of our modeling so that we might have plots that individuals could grow, and building the skill set capacity in the community, but then also having some high yield for commercial sales. For example, having a very large potato plot, perhaps that the Anchorage Native Medical Center might buy for us and help to then provide some funds for the garden. Next slide, please. And then we have our Tyonek Youth Conservation Science Program. So this is really our outreach and skill building program. Right now we have a grant from the Alaska Native Education Program through the Department of Education, working also with NRCS and small foundation grants to be in the school doing salmon work, doing fish monitoring work, doing agriculture work. And then right now we're building a curriculum where students are learning very specifically the skills that we use in our conservation work so that we can fulfill our greatest mission, our greatest vision, which is to have all of this work be sustainable within the community itself, so that we are raising the next generation of folks who will take our jobs. Next slide, please. And then the fourth leg of our stool is our technical assistance. So this is really why we exist as well, sort of that middle ground where we provide that technical and financial assistance to landowners. So when landowners come to us, whether they are corporate landowners or individual landowners, we can help them to meet their conservation goals. One of the other things that we do under this program is work with Tyonek and other folks in our district on sustainable practices, so waste reduction, and working on some energy efficiencies in the rural area. We coordinate again with the NRCS programs like CSP or EQIP that really fund the landowners for the work that they do. We've been working towards doing some better conservation planning, having that skill set in our office, and then driving those community-driven priorities up into the science projects and up into the agencies. Next slide, please. And then Robert, I don't know if you wanted me to run through the last 2 slides, or if you wanted to talk about some of our challenges and ways that agencies can work with us better.
You can go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. So some of the challenges that we see is that it can be very, very challenging for us to get matching funds for federal and state grants. Right now, I don't know the status of other tribal conservation districts, but TTCD is 96% funded by federal and state grants. So finding those matching funds through a different revenue stream when we don't really have a donor base and we don't really have things that we can sell for high unrestricted funds is a challenge. And when we don't have non-federal funding, not only are we challenged with matching funds, but it can be difficult for us to then fund some of our own priorities. So, growing some of our own skill sets in the office or getting some of the things that we need that may not be covered by a grant. And then the other is that, capacity is always a challenge. Sometimes there's an opportunity in there to partner and network, but a lot of the funds, like, for example, what we see in the infrastructure funding right now says that it needs to go to a government unit, so that it needs to go to the tribes, and that's great, except that a lot of those tribal partners are very understaffed and may or may not have the skill set or the capacity at any time to administer those grants. And so looking for mechanisms where we can really be of assistance in that, and hoping that agencies will continue to work with us to make those mechanisms possible, instead of things getting bottlenecked by going through what might be a very small tribal office. And of course, we are also relatively minimally staffed, but we do have we tend to be very passionate people in our roles. Next slide, please. And so when we were asked, what are some of the things that agencies might do to support Indigenous-led conservation planning, these are some of the thoughts that came to us. And these are not as conceptual as, if we were really advocating for larger systemic change. These really focus on some of the small day-to-day changes that are helpful to us. One is really knowing that relationships are powerful. So these are communities of people. These are not people who are moving from community to community. These are folks who are in the community, and the longer relationships, the deeper and more trusting relationships they can have with folks in their organizations and in their agencies, the better. So that sometimes we see agencies who prioritize moving staff around can really break those relationships, and puts a lot of onus on the tribes and the communities to continue to keep training those new staff that they then interact with, year by year. And so we would also suggest, as you're doing right now, right, training your folks on how to work with tribes, instead of putting it again on the tribes to do that training, but to have a lot of that work done beforehand. Understanding that natural resources are integral to the life, family, and culture and purpose of the communities that you're working with, and doing things like adjusting federal calendars that may not match subsistence calendars. So just being able to modify your perspective on the world with the perspective of the folks that you're working with, and then really integrate community priorities with the agency priorities. And so our final thought was building our NGO or tribal capacities. As you know, and as we're all experiencing, capacity is an understandable issue. So just having patience and finding ways that we can think outside the box to make sure that things happen. Helping us to navigate the system. Something that we run up against a lot is working with program officers who point us to a website, point us to, here's the reporting that you need to do. Here's the very confusing website that you need to figure out. I also don't know how it works, so I can't help you. It's been really challenging for nonprofits and for tribal entities, and especially when we work together to try to navigate that. So please, just adding some time and money for challenging logistics. One of the thoughts that has occurred to me is that if there were a mechanism by which some of these nonprofits that are created by the tribes could stand in and administer for the grants that coming through the infrastructure bill, for example, it might mean that more money needs to be added to be spread around. But in the long run, then the work will actually get done. So next slide, please. Those are the end, I think, of our thoughts here at TTCD.
So awesome. I love it. You guys are doing amazing work and have been. How many years? When did the signature from the secretary begin?
I think it was 17 years.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it's been that long though.
Yeah, time flies, and I just remember that visioning process seeming kind of foreign, but it was interesting how that worked. And the initial tribal conservation district board members had to close their eyes and imagine flying over the land 7 generations from now, which it seemed a little bit silly, but then when people really got into it, what you wanted to see 7 generations from now across the landscape became the vision from which the district wrote their like 5-year plan and 10-year plan, and then resulted in all those tangible results that you just talked about, which I think is so inspirational. All Indigenous leadership there, which is exactly what we were hoping to hear from you today. So thank you, all 3 of you, for that presentation. And we're running up against the clock. I think we can entertain 1 or 2 questions before we move on to the
Well,
next.
just one comment, please.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when TCDs were being formed and working with Fish and Game and all the departments that wanted to help out. I remember we did a program, or we worked with, I'm not sure if AVI does it right now, but it was called We1. I don't know if that's currently in place or not, so that's a pretty good program or a pretty good study for anybody that's interested.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Kristi?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, Robert, yeah, we're still doing it. The working effectively with Alaska Natives.
And that's the training, the week-long training that we also do at the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so it's a week-long immersive cultural experience more than training, and people learn about history, pre-contact, Alaska Native cultures, cross-cultural communication, traditional ecological knowledge, and lots of other things, including eating really good Native food and listening to and watching Native dances and songs. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Liana. My screen is tiny, so I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat box, or Liana, you can just go ahead and introduce Joe to us as well. Take it away. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much to our Tyonek crew and Kristi for presenting. Really appreciate you guys sharing the awesome work of the tribal conservation districts. I've really loved collaborating with the TCDs in recent years. And I'm really excited for us to go across the border into the Yukon, which is again part of the reason why we structured this to be having this conversation and dialogue on both sides of the border, because our lands and our peoples are connected. And our next speaker, Joe Copperjack, is actually a great example of being someone with ancestral roots and also in his work life being connected across the border. So I'm very, very honored to have with us Elder Joe Copperjack. He is the Senior Policy and Planning Advisor for the Yukon Land Use Planning Council, which has offices based in Whitehorse, Yukon. He's the grandson of Chief Jim Boss of the Ta'anmun, which means the Headwaters peoples of Lake Labarge in Yukon, and also of Copperjack of Chitna, Alaska. So Copper has an amazing resume and many years of experience in all kinds of capacities. He is the former Council for Yukon Indians Vice Chairman. He's been the chief of 2 different Yukon First Nations. He has experience as a senior self-government negotiator Aboriginal Relations Manager, Economic Development Manager positions, and has his own tourism business, or he did. Impressively, Copper, he's got decades of experience with the land claims agreement and self-government agreement negotiations between First Nations and the territorial and provincial governments, as well as the federal governments, in the Yukon Umbrella Final Agreement, as well as the Gwich'in Tribal Council (SGA) and other negotiation processes. He also has done work in economic development. He's advised Northern First Nations regarding the Alaska Highway Project and the Mackenzie Valley Geist Pipeline projects. Has advised companies including AMAX, which is a multinational mining corporation, coordinated with the Whitehorse Trout oil and gas project for the city of Whitehorse and the Kwanlin Dun First Nation, which included incorporating traditional knowledge of the possibility of hydrocarbon presence in Whitehorse and the Lake Labarge areas. He also has several degrees, including a 2-year renewable resource diploma from the Yukon College Business Administration, and the Justice Institute of British Columbia Conflict Resolution Certificate, and also he's completing an MBA degree program in community economic development. The business that he owned, called Atsitan, which means Grandpa's Trails Tours, that he operated in the Yukon. It included visits to elders' homes, entertainment shows, high mountain trekking, and river canoe trips. Sounds like a lot of fun, Copper. And he's a great storyteller. And I'm really excited that he's here today to share with us the land relationship model that he's been working to develop over the years. It's a really, truly amazing example of how to bring forward Indigenous worldviews and ways to the planning processes that we are all engaged in. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Copper, and I see he's got his slides pulled up. And if you, Copper, if you want to put that into presentation mode, then we'll be able to zoom in on your slides. And thank you so much for being here today.
Where do I find this presentation mode?
If you go down to slideshow, or up to slideshow, where just move your cursor a little bit to the left. You see that on the top row next to animations, it's a slideshow.
Right.
Yeah. You can click on that and then do from the beginning. I think that should do it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very wonderful introduction. It kind of brought back a lot of memories. Boy, didn't realize I was that old. I spent a lot of time, almost 35 years of trying to understand the word no from government. And you're fighting for your Aboriginal rights and the self-determination. Present your case and they say, no, sorry, you can't do that. No, 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 no. So it kind of teaches how to build resilience and not to give up. And thank you for the Tyonek presenters. And again, thank you to Leona for inviting me here to give my short story of the land and people relationship model, which I started to put together back in the spring of 2018. And since the last 2 years, I've been editing it, the whole 2 pages of it, about 45 times. And now it's taken off by itself ever since I gave the first presentation over 2 years ago. And it's kept me more than busy. My name is Gokon, which means to break trail or to go ahead. My mom, Shuke, is the daughter of Kishwoot, or Chief Jim Boss, who's pictured here, of the Lakeland Marge area of Whitehorse. He's well known as a person that made it known that there should be some compensation paid to First Nations because all the gold seekers of 1898 were tearing up their land and killing their game. On my dad's side, Z Kayak Eco Adachan means he who walks behind his grandpa with a walking stick. The son of Copper Jack, who was born in Terrell, Alaska, just outside of Chitna. So a big chunk of me is Satna. His dad, my great grandpa, Zita Cho means big old man chief, or the English version of Copper Chief. Came over to the Canada side about 1885 because he had killed a Russian, I believe, probably in his village at Terrell. He brought over one wife from Klukwan, Chilkat Tlingit, 6 sons and a daughter. His brother came with him to reside permanently in the Upper White River in a lake called Tassimo. He left behind 2 wives and 13 kids at Terrell and began his new life in the Canada side. Yes, my story begins of a very short little parable by a elder from the Tucker River Tlingit. It says that, Longo people say that the land is the teacher. The land teaches the animals how to live on the land, and the animals in turn are our teachers. They teach us how to live with them on the land. The problem is, you said that Gutran or foreign people have come into our land with their policies and laws that conflict with the land. And he said, our job is to teach these Gutran how to live with the land. And therefore, this land and people relation model is a collaborative knowledge building tool that respects both Yukon First Nation, Longo people's way and Western knowledge. And it uses 3 key laws of respect, care, share, and 2 addendums that are part of this model, the no voice and the knowledge stream tree, which includes affected parties' viewpoints and Longo knowledge principles. The model directs, balances, and frames a collaborative planning process. And I just want to try to move this side up and top here somehow. It also describes a sacred space. So as I said, that it's a Longo people's way. And I should mention that about the 5th draft out of the 45, I had a dream that there was a bunch of elders that came into my log house. And they just came in and sat down. Must be 30 or 40 of them. And then at the end, there was an elder, well known in the Yukon, by the name of Annie Ned. She was walking by, she looks inside, sees all this commotion, I guess, and walks in. And I was trying to find her a chair, but she already seated herself in a corner of somebody else's chair. And I said, oh, so good to see you, Annie Ned. Why did you come here? And she shook my hand and she said, kind of looked at me. I said, my name, Copper Jack, Joe Copper Jack. She goes, oh, shoot gay, you know, shoot gay. My mom, Billy Jack, my dad, Kish with my grandpa. He said, yeah. And then I woke up and she shook my hand. I felt that cool water was working its way up my arm. And I said, geez, why did they visit me here? Like, what is the reason for their visit? And I finally began to realize that this model, this tool I was working on, kind of got their blessing. And I later realized that not only did I get their blessing, but I think that they also told me that this model was not my idea. So if they come into my dream in my life to get me to put together a model that they wanted to share with you people, then I thought, like, what do I call this? What came to me was like done long ago people, like a talking stick. This model is like a talking stick that they're passing forward for the future generation people to use. And the reason I thought firstly of being anxious about something was I couldn't understand why people were not doing anything about climate change. And so I began to work on this tool. The three components of the model is that we use three key laws: respect, care, share, as prerequisites in the collaborative planning table. Respect means to give the highest attribution to everything created by the creator. Care means to give out the responsibility to caring for the land and for people. And share is to share knowledge openly and respectfully to the young people, to share our resources carefully. So those are the three prerequisites of the table. As you can see in the diagram where the three laws overlap, I call it a sacred space. And the sacred space is your friendly solutions that you're trying to attain or achieve from all of your discussions that happened. You take part in around the table. And these three laws are used equally in combination with other natural laws. Respect is the first law you learn. However, as you mentioned, all laws are of equal powers and value. However, in our way, Indigenous laws are applied internally first, then to others, moving outwards into the broader worldview. For instance, a model applies to yourself. Do you respect yourself? Do you take care of yourself? And do you share what you know to your kids and to others? And then it's your immediate family, your extended family, your clan, your community, your nation, pets, animals, land, water, as you go further into your worldview. And the model tends to rebuild healthy relationships and respect between land and people, knowing that reconciliation can only happen if people live in harmony with nature. And at the same time, the model tries to rebuild respectful relationships between people where everyone is treated equally. The second component of the model is I call the no voice perspective. And it comes from long ago, people's approach to land relationship that all affected parties are part of the decision-making program and planning. model. So the picture here shows a caribou. And what I tell people is that 300, 400, 500 years ago, instead of sitting around a round table, all the elders, Indigenous knowledge holders would sit around the campfire. They would select or appoint one person to speak on behalf of, in this case, let's say their discussion was caribou range or, winter range. So this person would speak only for the caribou. That's his job in that discussion. In the model, I say, why should we speak for the caribou? Why don't we allow the caribou to speak for themselves? And that's how the model works. So in this case, we pulled up a chair and placed a picture in front. And as we go around a round table and get to the caribou chair, and each participant will say, I feel the caribou would say this to this issue on the table. And it's recorded and compiled. And the caribou becomes part of the decision-making process. But at the same time, it also would break any ties, or if there's a standoff at the table, and then the no voice would break that tie. So no voice is not only caribou or anything to do with hard science, but also soft science, human relations. So it looks and it makes room in our discussion and decision making to past generations, our spirit people of future generations. People mentioned about 7th generation, which is about 500 years. I say we have to look longer because of climate change. We have to look ahead at least about 15 generations because of the massive changes to the earth because of movements of landscapes. And it also includes Mother Earth, such as the land and waters, where some countries such as Peru or New Zealand are giving the rights of a natural person to rivers, etc. But this is just, like I said, quid done, or Ongol people's way, is that everything is respected, is cared for, and shared in a good way. Third component, I call a knowledge stream tree. This knowledge stream tree is how two knowledge systems or more worldviews could function collaboratively, side by side, without one trying to dominate the other. It has a watershed framework of a stream tree consisting of tributaries that allow life-giving waters or knowledge to flow into the main stream or trunk. And that there is a sacred space would be found between the banks above the water. That is where meaningful dialogue takes place and is quite sensitive. This diagram, I just wanted to show the comparisons of other models. Braids, you see, was by Robin Kimmery, I believe from the state of New York. A two-eyed seeing would be from the Marshall Elders and from the Maritimes. The stream tree model, the difference is that I don't advocate like a merger, because I say that on one side you have Indigenous traditional knowledge, on the other side you have Western knowledge or Western science. Your tributaries with the knowledge coming down. I say in some places you'll have narrows, and at these narrows, collaboration can happen because you have common interests there. An example I give is that I say Western science, use the word sustainable development. Indigenous ways, we say, you take care of the land take care of you, take only what you need. So it's the experts around the round table will decide, dealing with this specific issue that they're talking about at the table, is the remedy or solution an Indigenous knowledge remedy, or could it be a Western science remedy? So they would make that decision. And the experts at the round table are neutral, because everybody would have their own policies in their back pocket. But the experts' job in this model is to deal with the issues in a neutral fashion on the benefit of what you're talking about. Model of the importance of how two more knowledge can collaborate on common values and principles while respecting each other's differences in the midst of a sustainable development. In regards to rules of engagement, participants at the roundtable are responsible for developing the rules of engagement or terms of reference that should include the following requirements. You have to show respect for each other, affected parties, the land and water at the table. And remember, I give you a definition of what respect means. The highest attribution. You should feel as much as you should think. The reason I say that is because all of our old people always use the heart organ in regards to their communication with land, with animals, with our relations. It's easier to understand energy language as compared to having to try to figure it out with your brain. So I remember growing up, my grandma, who was a medicine healer, everybody calls her little grandma. And she would always say, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about this? I never hear her say, what do you think about anything? It's always about how you feel. The reason why I'm bringing it into the model is that, excuse me for a second. The reason I'm bringing it into the model is that in Western science, there are certain things that you conduct your scientific research. And one of the things that sticks out is that say, you cannot have any feelings. You have to be neutral, you have to be independent from what you're observing or researching. And looking at that, whether it be, was it Sigmund Freud or whoever, it's set up that your educational system and how you're going to do your research allows you only to use maybe 3 or 4 of your 6 senses, because you have to be independent. In the Indigenous way, instead of 6 senses, we say we have 7, because we include spiritualism, spirit people. And we always make sure you use all your senses to get the whole picture of everything you're talking about. We try to make sure that you don't shortchange yourself, because you're going to have a tougher time trying to get the whole picture if you only use half of your senses. So I say in this model, please use all of your senses to try to get the whole picture. It's very important. And you have to listen to understand what has been said, because too many times in this day and age, people listen to respond. They always seem to have that answer. When you listen to understand, you have to go deeper to understand what has been said. And especially if you're dealing with worldviews, you should clarify what you see and what you hear. if after I say something, then it would be good to ask, what did you hear me say? If it's not the same, then you'll have to, again, try to find a different way to explain to get the message across. Again, because you're dealing with two different worldviews and knowledge systems, and have patience. In the scenario of a square peg in a round hole, if we're talking about land planning, Indigenous traditional knowledge, we all know that our country is our homeland, whereas Western science, it's a region that you're going to undertake your study or your study area. And that everything on the land is our relations, whether it be the four-legged crawlies, winged, as I mentioned, rock, water, because we say that everything has life, everything has energy. If you have life and energy, then you have a soul, you have spirit. Whereas Western scientists look at that same thing as a commodity. In our homeland, we are stewards, we're caretakers, as a responsibility of being here, as compared to being a user, a resource user, which has a tendency of creating conflict. And in our way of looking at land or any resources on the land, it is all about relationship. I don't know how you say it in Alaska, but for instance, in Dawson, they say Trehote, or in the White Reserve, we say Dunke, meaning our way or the people's way. This is all about relationship with spirit, with the creator, the relationship with animals, water, land, the relationship with other people, the relationship with ourselves. As compared to Western ways, users create conflict, and therefore you would have to go through conflict resolution to look for your remedies. And from my hands-on experience now of working with the model with various groups, what's starting to come out is that with the Indigenous side, the process becomes just as important as the end result, if not more. We're noticing that the Indigenous knowledge holders are saying that relationship, building trust, is just as important as the end result. And that's starting to come out in our projects. So the question is, how could relationships fit into resource planning? And the problem is that your land use plans, or even any type of resource agreements or treaties nowadays, are fundamentally Western style arrangements that result in conflict resolution outcomes rather than relationship building solutions. And it just makes sense. This is how we're taught, because I always use a little example. I said that if it's 60 below outside and you're walking down a trail, you run into someone, wouldn't you like to have that person you run into to be a friend and an enemy? So just common sense that you're going to, during those hard times on the land in the north, to be always building relationships. And in a collaborative approach for land planning, Indigenous knowledge needs to be merged into the entire planning and implementation project, because your relationships build it creates a framework that builds healthy relationship on the land. And the model is a relationship building tool. And I use, again, the parable of a snowshoe. I say that your bindings is the respect, care, share laws. Your mesh is your mesh is the no voice, and the frame is your knowledge stream tree. The model uses the baseline, Indigenous knowledge as a baseline to create certainty and to maintain stability. I've noticed that with Western science projects, there always seems to be a movement of the baseline because of funding. And if government or industry is funding your project, there's always that underlying factor of they're going to want to have something favorable in their favor. So we go back to long ago knowledge to use as the baseline. And in the model, I use a Indigenous knowledge holder circle, which is a group of Indigenous knowledge holders that have the authority and a knowledge about TK, and they would be the ones to guide the whole overall plan as it pertains to Indigenous knowledge. And it seems to be working very, very well. So I just wanted to show an example of how the model works. We're just working on, the model is working with the Yukon First Nation Cultural Tourism Association, which are putting together tourism guidelines for the communities. And we did the first phase of relationship building, and that's another thing that's coming out with the model. We cannot go directly into collaborative planning because of the worldviews and the differences in regards to your knowledges. That we found that there has to be a phase at the front where this reconnection or relationship building takes place. And how we work it is that we start from the end in mind. I asked a question, what do you wish to achieve in this project? Like, what is your wish? And they would tell me. Then the second question would be, what do you wish to learn from Indigenous knowledge in this process? And they would tell me. And then thirdly, I ask, what do you see are the problems or obstacles? And from that, we begin to tailor this framework as we enter into a planning process. And so at the beginning of this phase, March 2021, March 1st, 2nd, 3rd, we use about 15 elders, one per community, and one from the northern community in BC, the Tucker River Tlinkits, that form this TK elders group. And they would be the ones to answer the questions that Western science, or in this case, it was the Tourism Association, had regarding traditional knowledge protocols or laws regarding relationships. And once that was completed, we came back 3 weeks later with a draft document of what we heard. And the elders holders would say yes, they would approve it because they wanted to make sure that they were cited and quoted correctly. And then thirdly, at the end product comes together, this TK holder circle again has to approve it because they want to make sure that what has been said in your final product is maintains the spirit and intent of what they said. So we designed call it a consent and knowledge agreement, where you need 3 approvals from the TK holder. One, they agreed to the consent to share their knowledge to begin with. Secondly, they would approve it at what we heard. And thirdly, they would approve it at the final product stage. And at the end, because they own the knowledge, whatever is used to collect the knowledge, whether it be tape recorders or recorders or video recorders, all returns back to the elders because that's their property. They are not giving you anything, but they allow you to use their knowledge for the purpose that you agree upon. And then all other knowledge, data, goes back to the Indigenous knowledge holders. So that has happened. These 3 steps has taken place. Now we're putting together the next stage, which is phase 2, that in June 2nd, tentatively, we're going to hold another 1 or 2 day gathering, where this time we're only going to use half the elders, which will be representing 1 per language group. And in this circle, you're going to have your First Nation tourism operators, Tourism Industry Association representatives, Yukon tourism representatives, Wilderness Tourism Association representatives. And the purpose here is to endorse or support these tourism guidelines that was put together by the elders back here in March of 2021. And once you get the support, then they begin to implement those guidelines. And basically, there's about 3 pages of it now. And the purpose of it is to say, this is our traditional laws in regards to our relationship with spirit, with water, with land, with animals. So while you are in our traditional territory, we expect you as visitors to do the same. And that's what's starting to unfold here as we're nearing halfway through that project. So in this case, with the presentation today, you're looking at Indigenous land use planning, or I call land relationship planning, because it's the healing of Indigenous homelands. So you're going to have your planning board, and they would be comprised of your, I would suspect would be your communities. If this is, the intention here is that if you want to put together an Indigenous land use plan, or Indigenous relationship plan, or stewardship plan, then your communities here would be your planning board. You would still have your elder circle from your region to answer any questions in regards to Indigenous knowledge. And as you move along to create your plan, we would include the no voice to have a seat at the table. Sorry, I should mention here too. Here, at this stage, the no voice will take place, will be part of this planning session down here. So with Indigenous planning, doesn't matter which side of the border, as Liana said, stewardship plans or relationship plans has everything to do with knowledge, and the intention is to create a healthy homeland for all the dwellers, all that is there. You're trying to maintain a balanced landscape, and you're faced with those challenges of pollution and climate change today. So if it's going to be a collaborative planning process, and I would strongly recommend that this is the road you'd want to take. Create your relationship plan, and down the plan implementation, plan review, and you can do your revisions to encourage what continues. And this one here, I thought I'd throw in last minute because if we're looking at the larger picture, even with this series and that you put together between Alaska and Canada, let's say you wanted to have a framework in regards to this type of an approach we're thinking about. Your planning boards, you would have your relationship building phase. You're going to have your TK holders from the regions. I see learning institutions, universities, your Western scientists, and here you have like fishing game people. And as you finish your phase, the first phase, and the purpose again of the relationship phase is that so you would have some knowledge in your pockets as you come to the collaborative planning table. And don't go there bare pockets. Have something in your pockets, otherwise you just bog down the process. That's what we found. And so again, you're going to include the no voice, and as you go through the process, you're going to include and can have other activities happening. Such as land stewardship. You can have a curriculum and your relationship plan implementation, even land guardians, which we're starting to do in the Canada side. Meet your plan review and then have your cycle. Again, respect, care, share is used, and no voice becomes part of the planning process. And these are some of the projects that the model has been involved with. Like I said, we came out of the starting block only 2 years ago, and there was no advertisement, just word of mouth. Caribou in the Schools is an working group from the Summit Mix Caribou Steering Committee. This was when I sat on the steering committee that I started the model, putting it together in the spring of 2018. And the contractor that's doing the Caribou School resource booklets for teachers heard my model and invited me to participate in putting together these resource booklets. So we're pretty well at the end of phase 2 now, where the booklets are going to print anytime now. Yukon Mineral Development Strategy, we use 8 elders, a 3-day workshop that helps a panel to look at recommendations about new mineral development strategies and legislation. The one I just showed you in the diagram, the protocol handbook. So we're in the second phase of the planning. The Tall Tens heard of the model, and they've used it in their stewardship plan. And the Royal Society of Canada created a task force directed by the Prime Minister to do something about COVID-19. The model in this policy paper that'll be coming out within the next couple of weeks, printed by Facets Science Journal. And if so, then they're going to want to use the model as a framework in dealing with the pandemic in Canada. Glad to hear Yukon University approached me. They said they were interested at this time about 3 projects, and one of them was here, the one that I'm kind of working with you guys right now. Resources, water resources approach the model. They wanted to invited the model for about 7 different projects in water in the Yukon. So we're working on the first 2. One is in the Liard Basin. The Kaskas are interested in their stewardship planning in BC. And Pellybanks First Nation want to use this model in their guidelines for development in their traditional territory. And as of last week, got an invitation to go to Saskatchewan to present the model to the Métis Nations of Saskatchewan in September. And if they like it, they may use it to help them in their renewable energy strategy and development in their communities down in, I believe, would be mostly northern Manitoba, I think. So the reason I wanted to show this is that because the model has been very simple, I use a KISS principle. It's very inclusive. It's very neutral, and it's been attracting a lot of movers and shakers in regards to planning. Western scientists, and now going into industry. It's been very, very busy times the last 2 years, at the same time as I'm maintaining my job as a planner in the Yukon Land Use Planning Council. So in a nutshell, that's my story, and I look forward to your questions. Kristi. So I turn it over to Leanna.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Copper. I always love hearing you speak about the model and its evolution, and it's very powerful way of working together. So I'm really glad that folks here today were able to hear from you, and I think we have questions lined up, and I think maybe Carrie or Crystal have been tracking those. So I'm gonna allow for Crystal to help me facilitate some Q&A.
Yep, and we have Mike Spiller with his hand up. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering if you could give some advice to planning processes that have been long established with certain procedures, and what was your experience with improving and altering those planning processes to incorporate aspects of your model when there's been long established, kind of like, this is the way we've always done it attitude? What would be your advice, and what was your experience in trying to counter that attitude?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mike. Yeah, I've been with the Yukon Land Use Planning Council for 5 years, and for the 3 years of doing work with the model, they kind of had to be very careful not to give a perception of conflict, because that was their insistence. They wanted to keep the model outside of their planning work under Chapter 11 of the treaty. And but now, before Christmas, we had a Indigenous planning and traditional knowledge workshop, and so my model now is on their website. And they're starting to, well, in the Yukon, there's certain communities such as Southern Lakes, where you have 3 First Nations that are putting together their own stewardship plan. You have the Tyonek in Dawson that have put together a stewardship framework. At the same time as there's a Dawson Regional Land Use Plan in progress. And I see that with the Dawson plan, unfortunately, TH got left behind because the Dawson plan had a head start. They were already got almost near the draft plan stage when they were shut down because there was a court case in the Peel watershed, and then everything had to stop until that court case was resolved. So with that in mind, I would say that your Indigenous relationship plan should be done first, so that you'd have your values and principles all intact, in place in your own stewardship plan. Because on the other side, Western science, or in Canada it's called the Canadian Institute of Planners, are well established. So how do you balance this inequities or inequalities if you wish to look at a fair collaborative planning process? As you mentioned, that your Indigenous knowledge has to merge right at the beginning to the end. And speaking with some of the planners in-house, especially my boss, I said the same thing with the use of the model in the chapter. Ask the question with the end in mind. What do you hope to achieve from a collaborative planning outcome? And then what do you see you wish to learn from Indigenous knowledge in that process? And what are the stumbling blocks you see? And at those various points along the process, there needs to be some adjustments. In the Yukon, because of the treaties, it's very political in the sense of the parties have a big say at the end, at the beginning, and at the end. They would sit down and write their terms of reference, and at the end, approve the plan. So from the projects I've been doing with scientists, is that what are we trying to achieve? All we're trying to achieve is to speak truths and facts, to at least have a starting point that is going to be well balanced and very truthful in regards to what you're dealing with in the land. You're going to have your prime movers, like in Dawson since 1898. I mean, the prime mover is placer mining. That may or may not affect that plan. How do you address that ahead of time? So, for instance, also, you notice in Western planners or in Western land use plans, you have zoning designations. And I say that when you draw lines on a paper or on the land, you create conflict. In the Indigenous way, probably what would work would be thresholds. Like in the Peel watershed, they're saying 80% full protection, 20% you can allow development. And when I look at it and I say, well, that 20% is way, way too large yet. Because who are we to say, okay, all you dwellers on the land, you're fair game. Because we've decided it. If you use the thresholds per project, I would say you're probably going to be looking at 1 or even less than 1% disturbance on a given place or region or area. Hopefully answer your question a little bit, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions for Joe Copperjack? You know that as I was listening, I had so many light bulbs and ideas and principles that can be immediately put to use. So thank you, Elder Joe. That was really inspirational.
Thank you so much, because as we're working on it, like I said, we've been doing it now for 2 years. So this is the hands-on experience phase, right? The revision phase. As I mentioned, there was 45 changes, but it was important. I didn't want her to make it longer. I had to keep it simple. That was my first advice was given to me. Joe, keep it as simple as possible. Keep it so that elementary school kids will understand it, because if they do, then everybody will. And I've taken the model to elementary school kids, grade ones. Yeah, the grade ones are saying we got to include the future generations. Yeah, that's so cool. Grade 6, grade 5 and 6, 8 or 9, grade 11. So just quickly, and I did fourth year planning students. I think I heard 2/3 of them cited the model. It probably has a lot to do with, again, trying to rebuild this trust. This knowledge agreement is very key, because we're doing the first phase of the Cultural Tourism Association. I said we were using 15 elders. We broke them into 3 groups of 5 so we can answer the questions. It was 3 days, 3 full days. And at the end, we would expect maybe 20, 25 pages of typewritten notes. And at the end, we said, okay, how much do we have now? She was kind of creaking her knuckles. She was saying 51 pages, over double what we expected. And that's when one of the elders was saying, the reason that we're offering more than you expected, Joe, she said, was that we finally feel that we are in a safe place and space. And that came from that knowledge agreement. And I believe it's the same thing that I forgot the lady's name. That was with you, Liana, that I shared the model with her. What did she say? She said this should have been done 30 years ago. That's exactly what the elder said in that Caribou workshop. When the elder said, Joe, this should have been done 30 years ago. And when I see it, things were not right, I guess. That it was not supposed to be, and now it's a time. And when I gave my first presentation, and I said that I'm not advocating merger, I said, because I said that, you know, racism and anger and bigotry and everything else is very alive and well throughout the world. Like, who am I to say this is what you got to do and not do? I said, climate change will force that merger. Climate change will make people work together. And a month later, the pandemic broke, and the pandemic is supporting exactly what I said. So in a way, it's kind of marketing my model and seeing that people have to work together now because of the changing times. You know, this climate change is making things move quicker, a lot quicker. And you add pollution to it. Wow. I'm just very honored and humbled that, that all of these scientists, very smart thinking people, saw what I said and have come forward to say, yes, we'd like to work with you, with your model, and trying to get results that you talk about in your model. And so far, it has been coming together very well, and the outcomes are very well received as friendly solutions. Who was the young lady that made that comment before? I thank her anyways. I didn't see who it was.
I think that was me, and yeah, lots of good comments coming into the chat. Carrie said that bringing those into the space that cannot speak for themselves, the caribou, the fish, the moose, the water, the trees, this is always an excellent reminder for me in the work. Thank you for that. And then there's a couple other comments. People are saying that they took lots of notes, and there's a question, can we get a copy of the model? So I was wondering if we could get your permission to share the PowerPoint slides, because there's a lot of good information there.
Yes, I've been kind of holding everything kind of close to my chest because we're working it out. And people I've worked with are working with, and just out of respect and care too, that you know, they pay for it, so you know, they should be the ones to say, okay, we can let it go. Especially we haven't released like the knowledge agreement. that's kind of held close to my chest right now. A lot of people have asked me to begin to write now the outcomes of these different projects. And I feel maybe another 4 or 5 more, and then I'll have feeling good in regards to putting it together as a package so that we can start writing it and letting it go in written form. But right now we're just in that stage of making it work, and it's just a wonderful feeling that to be able to see it working. And it's the Western scientists, yes, that really like the no voice, because the no voice represents your precautionary principle, right? Citing a sign of caution. And of course, like the water, people love the stream tree, right? Water, I guess. But it's such an enjoyment, and just to be part of it. And I thank like the elders and the people that shared their thoughts in me to put it together for you people, because we're passing it down for your generation. We're the ones that kind of polluted the world, right? The baby boomers. And so we have to do something responsible. And that is my contribution, with the permission of spirit elders that guided me. And now to see the partnership with eager, smart people, scientists, industry people coming forward. It's a healing tool in itself, because you want to heal the land first, right? Your relationship, your reconnection has to be with the land first. The land, the animals. I mean, like with water, in the Indigenous way, when we hold a glass of water, you should give it more respect than you would give to another person. Because if you think about all the people in the world together cannot create the amount of life that water creates. So you got to have a different attitude towards it, because that's life. Unfortunately now, even in the whole cycle, like if you're headwaters people up in the high country, so the water from the lower mainlands are coming up and dropping and giving you fresh water. So what is your responsibility? People down below in the stream, and those people that are taking care of the lakes down below in the oceans for it to come up like this. So you have to kind of follow the whole cycle. Unfortunately now, you're starting to find plastic in water all over the place. And now it's all in our bodies. So that's our contribution, not only to humankind, but to Mother Earth. So what can we do for our own sake, for the sake of the 7th generation or the 15 generations down the road? Like, what is our responsibility? How can we help ahead of time? And this is where I thought that if you could hear the words of these people in the future to say, this is how your decision would affect us, may help in our decision making. And so far, like I said, it's been very overwhelming with the positivity and the positive energy that I felt working with the model and seeing these results. And probably most of Canada will hear about it as soon as it pops out in that fastest science journal. So,
Well, Masi Joe, Elder Joe, we learned life lessons from you today. These are not just career lessons or the next 10 days lessons. These are for life And I hope we all can take those principles you taught us and bring them into our lives and really put them to work. So, buenos chish, masicho, thank you for sharing your heart with us.
Yes, I'm going to change to Masicho, Shonithan, Shothan, and Kaskaze, Suga, Sinla. Okay, so we'll see you folks again soon, somewhere down the road.
Yes, I hope so too.
Okay, goodness cheese. Okay, take care.
Thanks, Copper.
Okay, goodness cheese again.
Hey, we are not going to do breakout groups, but we are going to have a discussion. So here's what we're going to do. I just put a thought here in the chat box. So in the remaining time that we have together, we learned about the visioning process with Tyonek Tribal Conservation District and about the 3 laws and the relationship building model from Copper Joe Jack. And I'm gonna just share what I put in the chat, and then we're gonna have a little bit of quiet time, but then we're gonna just open it up for discussion. So I want you to think about inspiring one another on today's call. We want to, this whole series is meant to share ideas across landscapes in Alaska and Canada. And the reason is because the state of the planet indicates that we need a different approach. So the visioning process led to tangible results, as you saw with Tyonek, through Indigenous leadership. How can visioning work for your organization and your partners? And then follow that on with, how do you see that vision moving into results? And you can either sit back and relax and just think about those questions, or you can do a free write. For some people, you're a physical thinker, so free writing is helpful. And then Joe Copperjack offered numerous examples of best practices and principles while planning for land uses. So we want you to think about best practices and principles, in addition, different ones than the ones he presented, that you know are best practices. And then write them in the chat in bullet format. And I put a couple of examples in the chat just for you to think about as a principle or a best practice. So with that, Liana or Carrie, anything to add to those instructions? We're going to do a 5-minute quiet time and then open it up for questions. And you can begin putting things in the chat at any time. Okay. Well, let's start with a 5-minute quiet time now. Do some thinking and free writing, and then I'll bring you back to the group and we'll have a discussion. All right, one more minute, just a warning for one more minute of quiet time. All right, so let's come back, and if you can turn your cameras on and wave to each other. Say hi to each other. Yay, people. Yay, awesome. Okay, and if you did write down some best practices or principles that you have tried and that you know work, go ahead and put them in the chat, because what we're going to do is we're going to harvest that into a single document, including some of the ones we've heard today in our presentations, and share that out with you. So some of your brilliant ideas can be shared with others, and you'll get the brilliant ideas from folks who are here in this class with us. So open it up for discussion. What came to mind as you thought about the visioning process and land use planning and how that relates to our work? And you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute and speak.
Yeah, Crystal, I just really appreciated the no vision or no voice perspective, and bringing that into the planning process, and really just appreciated, you know, in our world of agency culture and thinking about sort of our various planning processes, what it would be like to bring a photo of the species that we are working on and sit them at the table and give them a voice. And I just really connected with that and thought that that was a fantastic thing to really think through as we work in our own spheres and those processes that are already established.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. What a powerful way to include the voices in a way that isn't us trying to speak for them. And yeah, that was pretty powerful, and hopefully we can start doing that more. And also I see your chat with the best practice there, that recognizing the different values and elevating the relational aspects for planning. So thank you for that. Ariane, am I saying your name right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, being a former DoD employee, that different federal agencies are in very different places. So this audience and learning process is really, I think it's really profound and fascinating for me, being a a student again at UAF, but it also reminded me how far away different agencies are toward having appropriate culturally appropriate training to work with the tribes. And I'm happy to see some agencies are much further along than others, but I can say, at least for visioning work for DoD, they certainly should be cross-training across other federal agencies that have some plans in place.
Thank you for that, Ariane. That's good to hear. And definitely, you know, elevate in your own agencies that that concept of having that cultural training be a regular part of budgets and personnel. You know, like it takes a lot of my time to do those trainings. So you need a person in the agency dedicated to stuff like that. So make sure supervisors and leaders in agencies know that that is important to doing our work in Indigenous homelands across Alaska and the whole planet. Thank you. Sherry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I really enjoyed the slide when I asked you if we can get Joe a copy of Joe's slides, when he had like the different lenses. And the one thing I noticed was the one on the left of this, on my left of the screen anyways, what the braided one was where resources were working together. And when you got to the other side of the paper of the slide, there was more separation between Western and traditional. I think, you know, they're totally relatable. And one thing that I noticed about working at Fish and Wildlife compared to when I was working at the National Park Service, maybe it's just because I'm working in the Office of Subsistence Management, but here at Fish and Wildlife, I've noticed that there is more encouragement and appreciation for wanting to learn and collaborate and promote traditional cultural knowledge and resources, and to hold those people up so they can be seen and voices can be heard. Whereas at the Park Service, it's not so much. I know that there's been, you know, books made, because I have copies of books from like World War II, and some people that did some work out on Alaska, and, you know, they have the books, but they're not promoted. And I think that being here in Fish and Wildlife, we have that opportunity for us as Indigenous peoples to not only represent the tribes that we come from, but, you know, to take it up a notch to represent the regions we come from, to represent the state that we come from. Just like our informal group that we have, trying to bring voices together, you know, to find ways that we can become bigger and louder and be heard, and just, and then how Joe was talking about, he's so soft-spoken, how traditional knowledge is more of being, I don't know, for me the impression I got was like it's more spiritual, it's more being in touch with nature. It's a relationship in a well-tuned balance with, you know, the natural and cultural resources that we have, you know, and since time immemorial. Whereas with the government side, everything's so technical and scientific, and trying to get them to look outside of their box. So I think that trainings like this can really enhance that ability to, you know, change the lenses that they wear.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Yeah, the visuals for me also were particularly helpful when he was showing the tributaries in the streams, and then the braid and the two-eyed seeing and the Venn diagram. That was helpful for me to put things into different kind of perspective, because it's not black and white, and it's not there's no like linear step-by-step guide for how to make Indigenous knowledge and science on equal footing in a system that we've been operating under for the last 150 years. So
yeah.
Okay, one more, Mike, and then we're gonna summarize and wrap up.
Wow, this was a great session. And the 2 points I'd like to make are, having struggled my whole career with the tension between Western science and Western ways and traditional ways, this class really offered a way to unify both. And I particularly like the idea about visioning the future of a community, such that what some of the TCDs are doing. And I think it's also incumbent on any government entity now in this day and age initiating a planning process, whether it's a refuge or a park or BLM resource management plan. It's almost incumbent on them to first go to the community and help them envision what they see to happen on the lands that are their homelands surrounding them. And then once that visioning has happened, then embark on the official plan. And then secondly, my second point is I really like the visuals as well. And again, in understanding the tension between Western ways and traditional ways, Joe Copper had a wonderful way of emphasizing the unity of both and the value of both. And I think it's incumbent on all of us here at this webinar in our own ways to help implement those two strategies in future efforts. And so what a wonderful opportunity to do that. Everybody here is empowered in some way or another to help move the trajectory a little bit and improve it. And so thank you for inviting the speakers, and great session today.
Awesome, Mike. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to provide a closeout.
Basi, everyone. I hope that everyone is able to read all the comments in the chat, because really the dialogue there is so rich, and the centering, the uplifting of tribal governance priorities and vision, and centering that is really a theme throughout the thread. But in the sense of our time, it's for today. I am going to end with the words of Ralph Wolf, who will lead us in part of our class on Thursday and our last time together. And Ralph shared, moving at the speed of trust. And I do think that says volumes. There's a lot of points made to relationship. And it is the investment in those relationships and the investment in that trust that moves these collective efforts forward, that builds the bridge, that creates the time and the space to ensure that the Indigenous peoples of that place, that their voice is centered in the work. So I really appreciate that from Ralph and Mike and Donna, Daryl. All of your comments are really thoughtful. And so I really look forward to our time on Thursday as we hear from both ICC, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and Carolina Behe and Ralph Wolf and his crew there on real actions and real steps moving forward, and have our last dialogue group together. today was just another, to me, really amazing step and push. So I very much want to thank our presenters and speakers. I don't think they're with us today, at this time. And thank all of you for seeing it through, as we're down to 32 at the end of today. And it was nice to have an open dialogue here in the chat and online, instead of breakout groups, as we kind of grew smaller throughout our day together. So encourage your colleagues and your friends and everyone to show up. I know we're all busy, running ragged. I'm running to my next meeting right now, but that we all have some good time together on Thursday and are able to share our big takeaways. So again, Koyana, Anabasi, Gunashchish, Hawa to you all for your contributions, your thoughtfulness, and your relationship. Basi. We'll see you Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.